Greetings and welcome back to Fire Jump. This is part 4 where we're going to finish off our entire game. We're going to learn how to add some new rooms, sequences, animations, menus, and all of that. If you are just clicking into this video, then you are in the wrong spot because this is part 4 of a 4-part series. So go back to the beginning, check it out, otherwise you're going to be completely lost. Otherwise, let's go ahead and dive right in. So what we're going to focus on first is setting up our main menu, and that's going to mean a new room. So we're going to go to our rooms, and I'm going to right click and create a new room. I'm going to call this rm_menu, and then it opens up that room for us. And we need to change the width and height of this room to match our game room. So that means the width is going to be 1080 and the height is going to be 1920. Because if it doesn't match the other room, the first room that gets run by GameMaker is going to set the viewport, which is basically the window into your game. So if we have this as a square or more of a rectangle in the long fashion, let's say we had this room at 1920 by 1080 is the traditional like monitor view screen size, and we ran this and then we moved into the game room, it's going to cause a lot of issues. It's going to make the entire game look very, very squished because you're taking a room tall and making it very short. So that's something to keep in mind. The first room you've got in your game is going to set how the rest of the rooms function and look, at least in the sense of the actual view of your game. So if we run this right now, we've added a second room, but nothing is going to happen. It's actually going to take us right back into our game. And that's because the order of the rooms is set over here. So if we click on this little house icon, it opens up the room order. And then we can drag these around. So if I grab room menu and bring it up to the top, now room menu, even though it's underneath game, it now has that home, that house icon, which means if we run our game now, this is where we're going to start. We have nothing in this room at the moment, so it's just a blank black room, which is fine. We're going to do a lot with it, but that's how you change the order of the rooms right there. Because a game can have many, many rooms, sometimes dozens or maybe even hundreds, depending on the size of the game you're making. And so you want to make sure you keep these organized and you want to know which one you're starting on. That way you're where you're supposed to be. And now that we've got our room's order set up correctly, what we're going to tackle next are sequences. So there's a group right here for sequences, and I'm going to go ahead and right click, and we're going to create a new sequence. And this one we're going to call seq_menu. And then I'm going to press F12 to give us some space here. And a sequence is a new type of asset that you have not seen like this before. Now, it does have a canvas, kind of like a room right here, where we can place our assets inside of it. But what a sequence is used for is for animations. So when we bring an asset into here, we're going to have full control over how it looks, where it moves, how it sounds if it's an audio file, and everything else about it. Sequences are an incredible tool to create any kind of animation, and we're going to be using it for the menu screens, but that is just scratching the surface. So once you're comfortable with sequences, definitely come in here and play around with them more because there is so much you can do with them. So let's break down the sequence layout right here. So we have the canvas up top here, which is where we're actually going to place our assets. The track panel's down here in the left where we're going to actually see the properties of those assets, and we'll be able to add more specific properties that we can control. And then we have the dope sheet over here on the right, which is where the tracks will be, and we can control the animation style, how long they live for, and when they are outside of the scope of the animation. So to get started on this, we're going to need a few sprites. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this plus icon up here, type 3, click on sprites, and press create. So now we'll scroll up a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and import. And inside of the art assets, what we're looking for is going to be under UI, and we are looking for this Fire Jump logo. So we're going to rename this sprite to SPR logo. and we want the origin in the middle center, which ours already is, so we're all set there. Then we're going to come down and click on import, and we want all three of these sprites. So I'm going to click on the first one, hold shift, and I've got all three selected. I'll press open, and it brings all three of them in, and this is going to be the SPR underscore button. So we're going to have it when we click on it, it's going to change, or when we hover over it, it will change. So we have all of the different styles for the button right here. And we just need to make sure this is middle center and that it has 0 FPS, because we don't want it animating unless we specifically go in and animate it. And the last sprite we need is going to be the menu background right here. So I'm going to open this up, and then we'll rename this to SPR menu background. And we're going to put this one in the top left specifically. So make sure that that changes from middle center if you've got that preference saved. Now let's go ahead and return to our sequence, which actually is a tab up here. So I'm going to click on SEQ menu. And we're going to first change this number over here, the sequence length. It starts at 60. We want it to be 120. And this is in frames. So this is essentially going to be a 2-second animation because our game runs at 60 frames per second. Then we're going to come up here and we're going to click on the canvas frame settings. And the canvas frame is specifically for use inside of the sequence editor. It doesn't actually change anything about the sequence, but it does help us to visualize where assets are at inside of our sequence. So we're going to change the width to match to 1080 and the height to 1920. The sequence also has an origin, as you can see right here. So we also want to change the origin to be in the top left corner. So I know specifically that that's actually going to be negative 940 and negative 960. So we can come in here and see that now the origin is in the top left. So we can use that. So where the origin is at for the sequence, that's based on where it gets created when we actually make and set this instance in our room. With those things out of the way, we can now dive into animation, which in my opinion is the much more exciting and more fun thing to do. So let's go ahead and grab the logo. So SPR logo, we're just going to drag it into the canvas. So it is now inside of the canvas. It's a pretty large logo, as you can see. And so now the track panel and the dope sheet have been filled in with this asset's properties. So first, let's take a look at the dope sheet. You can see this key, which is an asset key. For me, it's green, but it might be a different color for you, which is fine. The length of that is how long we're going to see our asset for. And we want this logo to be visible the entire time. So I'm going to click on the end of it here. And I'm going to extend it all the way to 120. And then we can scrub through here, which actually changes the frames of what we can see. And now we can see that it's there the entire length of the animation. Now return the playhead, which is this orange or yellow line right here, to the beginning, which is important because when we're animating, where the playhead is at determines the properties for that specific point for that asset, which we're going to dive into right now. So over here on the left, if I click this little arrow, it shows us that we have position available. Now, position is just one of the properties that we have. And if we click on this little plus over here on the right, you'll see that we have a lot more properties that we have access to. But there's a quicker way to add all of the ones that we are going to need. So I'm going to select SPR logo, and then I'm going to press this plus, which is recording a new key. So when we record a key, it tracks all of the data about its origin, position, rotation, scale, and any other ones you've added inside of here for that specific frame. So what we can do is then move our playhead to a new spot and record a new frame there. And then if there are any differences between those properties, such as its position is different, it will then move between those two until it reaches that one that it's supposed to be on. And that is called tweening. So let's go ahead and animate this logo to show you what I'm talking about. So we're going to have the logo start really small and then grow large over the course of the animation. So if I come up here and click on this little gizmo mode, I can change it between translate, which is moving it, scale, which is how large it is, rotate, and origin. So I'm going to click on scale, and now these little lines in the middle of our sprite have changed. So if I click on it, it's actually going to change the scale of our sprite. But we can also click on the edges. We can rotate it here. We can also shrink it if we grab just the right kind of arrow here, which is also really nice. So what we're going to do is start it really, really small. And I'm going to put it here towards the middle top. So if you want to follow along exactly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a scale of about 15%. And we can actually come over here and just type these numbers in, which also really, really helps. Now, what we have set is it is automatically recording all of the changes that we do. This little toggle button sets it to do that, which is really nice. I'd leave it on. But now we can come over here to the end, and we'll go ahead and type in these numbers, 100 and 100, right back to where it should be. And now, if we come and put the playhead at the beginning, and we press play, we'll see that it grows large, just like we want it to. But that's a little boring. It's moving just between small to large in a very steady, predictable rate. I think we could spice this up by adding in some more movement, and let's try using some elasticity. The way we're going to do this is by using animation curves. So animation curves are similar to keyframes, but they can actually have a curve between two keyframes instead of just a linear or just a simple transition from point A to point B. Animation curves are very powerful and really cool. And so to use an animation curve, let's select the property we want, which in this case is going to be scale. And then we're going to toggle curve mode with this button over here. And this is going to open up a new way of viewing the animation that we've got. So we need to convert it to a curve first. And you can see that this is now the animation curve window. And if we press play, you can see that it still animates, and this is kind of a curve, but it's just not an interesting one. It is growing larger in a steady rate over time. But there's way more cool stuff we can do with that. So I'm going to click on curves and this little button right here. Let's go to Bezier, and down here let's click on elastic. And now you can see it's a much different curve. This is an elastic curve. And so now if we press play, we can see the effect of this animation. Now it looks a little weird because it's actually only affecting the x-axis on this curve. So I'm going to select Y and go back to curve. And we're going to select elastic again, and now they are both going to share the same animation curve. So if we press play, there we go. And if we look closely at this curve, you can kind of tell what it's actually going to do. So if we take this playhead, we can start it at the beginning and just slowly move it. And you can see that it's growing very, very quickly. And it actually exceeds the scale of 1. So it actually goes above the normal size of it. And then it drops back down. And then it kind of wobbles a little bit until it finally reaches the right size. And this is just one of essentially unlimited curves, because you can create your own curves. If you just want to like click on this and move it, you can do that. And then now it's really weird and messed up. But this is a custom curve that we just made, which I'm going to Control Z to take back. But you can create any kind of curve you want. And then you can also select from all of these curves that they've got: Bezier, smooth, and linear. So the options for animations are essentially unlimited, and you don't need to have an animated sprite to be able to create animations like this. So I think this looks really, really cool. The only thing I want to change is I want it to be down just a little bit more. So I'm going to bring the playhead back to the beginning, and I'm going to toggle out of curve mode so that we can actually see this. And now you can actually see that the curve is inside of here instead of just keys. And I'm going to change the position. I'm going to move this down here. And now if we press play, it's not so much at the top, which I think looks a little better. So specifically, I've got the position at negative 0.07 and negative 618.69 if you want to follow along exactly. So definitely don't be afraid to move it around, change things up, because remember, this is your game make it however you want. Now let's exit the sequence for just a minute, and we're going to go back into Room Menu, click on Background, and we're going to assign that background sprite that we brought in. So under the menu, we have this, and there we go. It's already the right size. We don't need to do anything with it. And now we're going to create a new layer inside of our room, but this one is actually going to be an asset layer, which are these two pluses right here. So I'm going to rename this to Menu, and then we're going to drag the sequence inside of our room. Click on it, and we want to line it up in the top left corner, and then we can actually preview this by clicking this play button right here, so we can see the animation in action. And then we can also run our game. Because our sequence is now inside of the room, we can see it in action right here too. So there we go. So that's a really good start to getting our menu set up, but we can't do anything because we don't have any buttons. So we're going to tackle that right after we make sure that our menu layer is in between instances and background. Depending on what you were clicking when you added the asset layer, it's going to be in a different spot, but we need ours to be in between these two. So make sure it's right there. And now we need to tackle creating some buttons that we can click on. Before we do that, we need to do a couple of things. We're going to have a sound effect for when we click on a button. So I'm going to go right click on sounds, and I'm going to create a new sound, and I'm going to call this sound button. I'm going to click on import, and we need to be in audio assets, and this is going to be called S&D button, and it sounds like this, which is a very fun sound button effect. And then we need a special font for these buttons that we're going to be using. So I'm going to right click and create a new font inside of our fonts group. And I'm going to call this FNT button. And we're going to have this be a very large font. So we're going to put this at a size of 74. And we're going to use the same font that we used before, which was like Potzen or Potzen. If you didn't install it, go ahead and use whichever one you want. This is the one that we're going to be using right here. But again, you can use whatever font you want. Just make sure that you've got it a good size and that it's going to fit inside of our button. And then we're going to create a button parent, because we're going to have several buttons in our game and we want them to share some code so that all the buttons react the same, but their children can actually run specific code, such as going to a new room or quitting or restarting, whatever the case may be. So let's go to objects, and we're going to right click, create a new object. I'm going to call this obj underscore button underscore parent. And let's add an event. This is going to be a create event, and we're going to assign a variable here. So I'm going to search for assign, and it's going to be the only one that pops up, it looks like. And we're going to name this variable text, and the default value is going to be button, and it's not going to be relative. So this is going to store the value of the text that we actually want to draw on the button. So it's going to be a string, and we're going to change it for each button, for each child button that we have, so that it draws the text it's supposed to have. And since we're going to be drawing, we're going to need that event. So let's add a new event, draw, right here. And we're going to search for draw self. It's going to be the first one that pops up right there. Because remember, when we take over the draw event, we have to then draw ourself. Now, our parent has no sprite. So if we put this object inside of our game and ran it, we would encounter an error because it would try to draw itself, but it has no sprite. Let me show you what that looks like. So if we go into our menu and I throw this inside of here, but we have to make sure we're on the instances layer, and I put this in here and I run it, because I'm calling draw self, it's not going to be able to work because it doesn't have a sprite to draw. Trying to draw a non-existent sprite. So make sure that you don't put the button parent inside of our game, and also that if you ever draw self on something, that it has a sprite. Otherwise, you'll get that error. Next, we're going to set the font. So I'm going to search for set font, which is going to be down here in drawing, right here. So set font, and we're going to do font underscore button. And under text, near the last option is set text alignment. And what we want to do for that is the FA center and the FA middle once again, because that's where we want it to be drawing right in the middle of our button. And then we need draw value, which is actually right here in drawing, so we can just drag that over. We don't have to search for something else. For the caption, we don't want anything inside of here. For the value, we want to put in text. And make sure that this is our variable text, not in quotes text. So we want to actually draw the value of what text is holding right here. So we have value text, and then we're going to do X and Y both at 0, and we want them to be relative so that it's drawing the text right inside of the button. And finally, let's grab that set text alignment and put it down and leave it just the way it is right there so that it resets it for anywhere else that we need. And so now this is going to draw the text on top of the button. So the order that we have here is important, because if we had draw self down here, then we'd be drawing text and then the button on top of it. So when it comes to drawing, the order is essential. If something is not appearing or doesn't appear to be working correctly, go in and double check the order you've got. Draw the object, then the text, and you should be all set. And now we're going to add the hover effect for the button. So you remember we brought in our button and it has 3 frames. So the first one is the default, the second one is for when someone's hovering over it, and the third one is for when someone actually clicks on it. So let's go back to our button parent, because we're going to set up the logic for that hovering effect right here. We're going to add an event, and this is going to be a mouse, and it's going to be mouse enter. So when this object recognizes the mouse is touching it, we're going to set the sprite to that second sub-image. So I'm going to search for set sprite, grab Pac-Man right here, and we're going to set this to SPR button, and the frame is going to be 1. And now we want to do the reverse when the mouse leaves. So let's go add event, mouse, mouse leave. We'll grab the Pac-Man again, SPR button, and then the frame is going to actually be 0. So it's going to revert back to what it's supposed to be. So when it enters, it changes it to the second frame, and when it leaves, it goes back to the first frame. And so that takes care of the hovering effects. Now what we need to tackle is when someone actually clicks on the button. So we're going to go back to adding event, mouse, and we're going to do left pressed. So this is only going to trigger when they click it once. Left down will trigger the entire time they're holding it down, which isn't what we want. We're going to drag the set sprite button here, and we're going to change it to SPR button, and the frame is going to be 2. So when they click on the button, it's going to change to that. But we're going to make it so that only when they release the button do we actually set things in motion for that button to start working. So we're going to add one more event to the parent, and it's going to be the mouse left released. And inside here, we're going to set the sprite one more time. So we're going to change it back to frame 1. But then we also want to play audio. So search for play, drag that inside of here. And we already have the sound we want, which is sound button, and we don't need to loop it or set a target. But now when someone actually releases it, it will trigger it to change back to the first or the second frame, and then play the audio. And now the next thing to do is to actually set up a specific child button that can run this code, but then we can set up the action for that child button to have, such as starting the game. So let's go into objects, right click, create obj play underscore button. And this one we're going to drag the sprite button onto here, and then we're going to set up its parent. So click on no object and then find button parent. And what's really cool here is that when we assign this parent, all of the code for that parent now shows up for the child, which means that this child is going to run these events just as if it had the code itself. But what's really cool on top of that is we can now interact with these in 2 different ways. So if we right click on create, we can inherit the event, which is what we're actually going to do, or we can override it. Overriding the event means I know my parent has code here, but I don't want to have anything to do with it. So you can completely remove that section of code from your parent. Inheriting means that, yes, my parent has code, but I actually want to add onto it. So go ahead and inherit the create event, And you'll see here that there's a code block called call parent event. And that's the first thing that we want to run, because all of the code inside of the create event, which granted isn't much, it's just this one right here, but there could be a large chunk of code. This gets run by this one code block. And now let's grab the assign variable one more time, and we're going to assign the text variable to the value of play. So this play button, it'll actually draw the text play instead of the text button, which is good. A button that says button is going to do whatever that button wants to do. And we need to know specifically that it's actually the play button. So with that, we have set up the text to draw. We don't need to touch the draw event because the parent is already doing that. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to click on the left released, and we're going to inherit from this. And then we're going to search for alarm. Now, an alarm is an event. So we have an alarm event here, and there are actually 12 of them. Alarms are a timer that we can use, which are really, really fantastic for when you need something to execute after a certain amount of time. So let's drag the set alarm countdown, and we're going to set it to 20, which means that 20 frames after the left released event triggers, we want the code in the alarm event to then execute. If we don't have an alarm event, then this isn't going to do anything. So we need that alarm event. Let's go to add event, alarm, and make sure you have 0, because that's the alarm event we've actually set right here, because you have 12 different ones to choose from. And inside of here, we just need to go to the next room. So I'm going to search for room, and then we want the go to room. And we want to look for room game, because that's where we want to go. Now, this could have all been done without the effect of an alarm, but we're actually going to add in a transition later in, and that 20 frame delay is going to make that transition possible. So that's why we're doing it this way. We could have absolutely just put in go to room in right here instead of the alarm, but because we want to do a little more later on, this is how we're doing it right now. Next, we're going to set up the quit button. And fortunately, the quit button is very similar to the play button, so we can actually just duplicate it. So I'm going to come up here and right click, and I am going to duplicate the play button and rename it to obj quit button. And we're going to open the create event, and this time instead of saying play, it's going to say quit. And then go to left released, and we can delete the alarm countdown because we don't need it. Search for exit game, and it's going to be under game, not common. It needs to specifically say exit game. And this is actually going to just quit the game right there. And you can tell that we don't need the alarm anymore, so we can actually right click and just delete that event from the quit button. There's no need to have events and extra code inside of your objects when you don't need them. So make sure you clean those up. Now let's go back to our sequence, because we can add more than just sprites inside of here. We can actually add buttons as well that we can interact with in our game. So I'm going to grab the play button and the quit button. And what I'm going to do is kind of bring this track down a little bit so I have a little more room to work with. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to drag these buttons down towards the bottom, give them a little bit of space in between. And now we'll be able to animate these buttons, but we can animate them in a totally different style than what we did with the logo up here. But before we animate, make sure you stretch the asset key for each of them all the way to the end. Otherwise, you'll find that they disappear after just a second of pressing play, and that is not what we want. So now we're going to have these buttons slide in from the left. But before we do that, let's go ahead and save the position of where they're at right now, so that we just have to record where they're coming from. So let's go to frame 80 here, and I'm going to click on the play button and record a new frame. We do the same thing for the quit button, and if we expand them, you can see that they now have those keyframes inside of there recorded. Let's go back to 0, and then I'm going to change my gizmo mode tool to translate, because it helps to be able to just click on this, and then we can click on the blue button to move it only along the x-axis, which makes it a fair bit easier. So let's bring these buttons out just a little bit. And then if you're clicking on that asset, you can actually see where it's going to go and how it's going to animate into its spot. And now if we press play, we can see them slide into place. But that's definitely too slow for my liking. So what we can actually do is change where the keyframes are at. So I'm going to grab this position keyframe and move it up to 40. So we're essentially going to cut this animation in half. So then they come in a lot quicker. Let's take a look at it completed right here. All right, that looks much nicer. Now you can go in and add an animation curve to each of these positions if you want. Definitely experiment, play around with it, but that's how we're gonna leave these animated. And now if we come into the room, we can check out the animation by pressing play. Looks great. Let's go ahead and run the game because we've actually got everything set up that we need to. So now we can hover over these buttons. They both react the same. If I hold quit, you can see it changes to that frame that whole time. And if I release, well, nothing actually happens because I took my mouse off of it. But if I click and release, game quits. All right, so that's the quit button working exactly as expected. And then if we press play, there we go. So now we have a menu that starts up. What we want to tackle next is fading into the next room to make it look a little bit better so it's not just a quick slice and dice into the next room. So to create our fade, we're actually going to make our first sprite. It's going to be a very simple one, but it's going to show you how to use the image editor, at least some of the tools inside of there. So let's go down to our sprites. In menu, I'm going to click, create a new sprite. We're going to name this sprite SPR Transition. And I'm going to go to Edit Image, and it's going to bring up the image editor. So now we can actually draw and do everything we need to inside of here. All we're going to do is create a black screen so that we can draw it on the screen and then have it slowly disappear when we move into or out of a room we want to transition from. So I'm going to click on Fill Tool. I'm going to click on the swap left and right, or you can just choose the color you want up here, and then we just fill it in. And that's really all we need for this, but you can see that there's a lot of other tools if you want to come in here and edit any sprites, make your own, do your own stuff. GameMaker has all the tools you need to be able to do that. And we can actually just leave it at this size because we're going to scale it as needed inside of the sequences. And now we're going to create the sequence we need to actually transition from the menu into the game itself. So I'm going to right click and create a new sequence. I'm going to call this one SEQ Transition Start. And we're going to change the canvas to what we did before. So it's going to be a width of 1080, 1920 here. And then the origin X is going to be -540. The origin Y will be -960. And we're going to change the length of this to 20 frames. Then we're going to bring in that black sprite. I'm going to full screen or center fit this here. And what I'm going to do is just grab the corners here until my arrow looks like a diagonal arrow. And I can drag and resize this completely right here. So it can be a little tough to get on just right. So play around with it until you get that, but then you can easily drag it to fill it up. Then let's expand the properties over here. Right now we've already got position and scale, but we also need to make sure that we expand the asset key all the way to the end, otherwise it will disappear. Now we need one more property inside of here. We're going to click on this little plus, and we're going to grab the color multiply. And now we're going to manually record a key for the color multiply only by clicking this toggle key on. And I'm going to scroll all the way to the end, and I'm going to click that one more time to create another key. Because what we want to do is transition from transparent to completely black. So I've saved the black part at the end. Now we're going to go back to the beginning. And I'm going to click on this little color box, and it brings up the color picker. And we just slide the alpha all the way to 0. And now if we press play, it goes from transparent to black. But now we need to do the transition end sequence. But the nice thing is we've already got a sequence almost set up exactly the way we want. So let's go ahead and just duplicate this transition start sequence. We're going to name it SEQ Transition End. Make sure we open it up because otherwise you're actually still on that start transition. And what we're going to do is we're just going to reverse these. So let's open up the properties. And on the first one we've got here, I'm going to click on that little color picker and change the alpha all the way up. I'm going to go all the way down here, click on that key, and change this one all the way down. And so now it is just the reverse. And that's all we need to be able to fade in from black to the game that we're actually going to be in. And that's all we need to have a really nice, smooth transition between our rooms. So now we need to add a layer into both of our rooms that this transition is going to run on. And it's going to need to be the topmost layer because we want to cover everything inside of the game. So in our rooms, let's go to room menu first. We're going to add a new asset layer, and it's going to be called transition. And then we're going to go into room game and add a new asset layer. And we're going to call this one transition as well. Both of these layers need to be at the top, and they should have the same name for them to work properly. So make sure they're at the very top to cover everything, and both of them are called transition. All right, so let's go into our OBJ button play, because when we click on this, so in the left released, this is where we want to create our sequence, not at the beginning of the game when the room starts, only when they press it. So we're going to search for create sequence, and it's going to be under the sequence here. So we're going to grab this, and the sequence we want is SEQ transition start. It's going to be X0 and Y0, but not relative because we have been placing that origin in the top left corner. Make sure the layer is in transition, and we do not need a target variable here at all. And this is going to work to create the fade to black, but now we need to fade out from black. So let's go into OBJ game, and on the create event, let's just go ahead and drag that one that we just used, the create sequence, down here at the end, because the game object only gets created when the game actually starts. So we want it to start with the sequence being made, and then it will just fade right out. So SEQ transition end 0, 0, layer transition, no target variable. And now we can go ahead and test this out because that's everything we need to have our fade into the game. Press play, and there we go. It's a very quick fade. If you want to make it longer, you can edit the times and the alarm that we've set up, but I just wanted something very smooth and very quick. Long transitions, unless they're very pretty and only done every now and then, can certainly be kind of annoying. So this is real quick, straight to the point. And next we're going to make the game over screen. And we're going to do this in a very similar way. We're going to make a button, we're going to create a sequence, and we're going to give those buttons specific actions. So let's go ahead and jump into that. What we're going to need is the game over sprite. So I'm going to scroll down to sprites in the menu, right click, create a new sprite, and I'm going to import the sprite we want, which is not going to be under audio, it's going to be under art, and it's going to be under UI, and it's going to be the game over. So I'm going to call this SPR game over, and we don't need to do anything into this sprite. Now we're going to create the replay button. So this is for when we die, we want the player to be able to just jump right back into the game if they want to try again. So we're going to create a new object. We're going to call this OBJ replay button. We're going to drag that SPR button sprite onto it. We're going to assign its parent, but this time the parent is actually going to be the OBJ button play, not just the OBJ button parent. So what's really cool here is inheritance can go down multiple levels. So this replay button is inheriting from play, which is inheriting from the button parent. And the reason we're doing the play button is the play button already has the code set up to run the transition and take us to the game room, which is all that we need to do. So inside here, we just need to inherit from the create event and assign that variable text, and we're going to give it the value of replay because that's what this button is. And that's all that button needs to do. It's actually really easy because we've already done all of the work inside of other buttons. Being able to reuse your code in ways like this is a fantastic goal to aim for. Not always possible, and it's not always worthwhile if your game does a lot of different things. But when it comes to the UI and buttons, this is really, really handy because we can add as many buttons as we want with barely any work. And the last button we need is the menu button, which is going to take us back to the main menu. And again, we don't have to start from scratch here. We're actually going to just duplicate the quit button. We're going to call this obj_menu button. And we'll open this button up, go into the create event, and change the text value here from quit to menu. And on left released, instead of exiting the room, we don't want this, we're actually just going to go to room menu. And that takes care of the last buttons we need. And now we just need to make one more sequence, but we're actually going to go ahead and just duplicate the menu sequence because we don't need to redo all of those settings we've already changed several times here. So we're going to call this sequence SEQ game over. I'm going to open it up. And so now what we want to do is actually take this same sequence, but just change out the buttons and the sprite. And what's really cool is we can do that without having to redo all the animations since they're already in place. So we're going to go up to Windows, and we want to search for the inspector. And it brings up this inspector window right here. So I'm going to try and minimize this down here. And we're going to open this up a little more here. So I'm going to expand it. And now we can see by clicking on one of these exactly what we've got inside of here and all of the properties about it. And so now we can come in here and actually change these assets while maintaining the animations we've already set up. So we click on the logo one first, and I'm going to click on SPR logo and just select that new one, which is game over. And then we can see that it says game over, and if we press play, it animates exactly the same, but it's a completely different sprite. And we can also do this for the objects. So let's go to the play button, and I'm going to select that and go to objects, and we're going to have this be the replay button. And then on the quit button, we'll go over here and change it to the menu button. Now, these over here in the track panel still say the same thing, but you can rename them here if it would help. So obj replay button. And the quit button is actually now the obj menu button. The inspector over here shows you what it actually is, and you can control all the properties here. These are just the names, which normally line up. Like this still says logo, but it's actually SPR game over. So changing the inspector, but not the names in the track panel, can get really confusing. So make sure you change those if you start editing and changing out a lot of your sprites and objects inside of sequences, but the inspector allows you to do that while maintaining all of the animations you've already done. So it's a great time saver. So don't forget the inspector when it comes to the sequences. Now to use this game over sequence, we're going to open up the obj player defeated, and I'm going to minimize the inspector because we no longer need it inside of here. And in the step event, instead of restarting the game, we actually want to create our sequence. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of restart game. And I'm going to search for sequence, and we have create sequence right here. Drag that into the if variable. And the sequence we're making is SEQ game over 0, 0, not relative. And the layer this is going to go on is the HUD layer, and we'll take out the target completely. Now, if we leave it just like this, our player defeated is going to continually spawn this sequence because it's going to continually be outside of the room. So we actually need to destroy our own object here. We're not destroying the sequence, we're just destroying this obj player defeated. Now we can run this and check it out. Our sequence will come up and it'll work exactly as we expect, which is really cool because we've done a lot, but we're basing it off of the work we've already done, which is cool. There we go. So we have all this. I can go back to the menu, I could replay. That's working exactly as expected. Now, one little challenge for you, if you want to try it, which I definitely encourage you to, is in that sequence game over, it should have a darker background, but we want to have it inside of the game itself so that the rest of the layers, like the windows and the fires and the civilians and anything else, get just a little bit darker to add some contrast to the menu that we've brought up. Give that a try. It's doing things we've already done, so you're going to want to bring in a faded background, maybe behind this or inside of the room, and make some contrast between these two. I'm just going to leave it at that if you want to add a little more polish to your game, because a little bit of polish can go a long way. But what we're going to move on to next is the UI sound effects, because we haven't really done much there. So let's go ahead and bring some of that in. So we're going to need 4 more sounds. So I'm going to go into sounds that we've got down here. I'm going to click on this plus, sounds, and we're going to have 4 to create. I'm going to scroll up and we'll start importing these one at a time. So we're going to go to art assets. We don't want art, we want audio assets. And we're going to grab the game over music first. So we'll call this S&D game over. We'll grab the sound high score. So this will be sound high score. Third one is going to be sound intro. So just SND underscore intro. And lastly is the sound menu music. So we'll go to sound menu music. So now let's put these sound effects where they're supposed to go. What's really cool is sequences can allow you to actually put music and sound effects directly into them because it's just an asset. So let's open up SEQ menu and we're going to grab sound intro and we're going to throw it in here. Now what we want to do is actually have this pop when the fire jump logo gets to be pretty large. So I want it to be right around 10 frames is where to actually start. And then I don't need it to be too long, so I'm going to bring it down to 40. And if we press play, we can hear that. Let's actually start it at 5 because the sound effect itself doesn't play immediately. There we go. I think that looks pretty good. And then if we run the game itself, we can hear it because it's just in the sequence. There we go. And so now we need to set up the game over music. So let's jump over to SEQ game over, and we're going to drag the game over music, not the game music, the game over right here. Now my playhead was at the end, so it actually brought it in there, which is not what we want. So I'll go ahead and drag this all the way back here. And you can see that it also extends beyond the length of our sequence. And that means that this audio file is actually going to continue repeating, which is not what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and click on stretch asset key, which normally makes a short key longer, but what it does is just conforms a key to the length of the sequence. So it'll take a long key and make it shorter. And then I'm going to bring it down just 1 frame here. That way it is not going to be the same length or longer, so it will not be repeating. Now, if we press play, there it is. Now it sounds kind of like it's getting cut off, but we're going to add in a high score with a sound effect that pops up here as well, and that will help it not be so abrupt, and it's actually going to sound really good at the end. So let's run this once and check out this end screen sound effect that we've got here. So when we die, it comes up, and it does not repeat. Perfect. Okay. Now we're going to add in the menu music, and we're going to do this through a new feature called creation code, which is really, really cool. Let's go to room menu, and inside of here, I'm going to go down to creation code. And this opens up a new code window that we can actually drag our blocks into. And this is only going to run once when the room gets created. And this is great because we don't need to make a whole new object or do something to get our audio running, because when we go into this room, we know we're always going to want to have the menu music playing. So the first thing we're going to look for is stop all audio, because we might be coming into this room for the first time, which is fine, but we might also be coming into it from the game because we have a way of doing that. So this will stop any audio that was playing. Then we want to play our background music, our menu music. So sound, menu music, and we want it to loop. So we can run this now and check it out. So now the menu feels and looks and sounds alive, which is really, really cool. And that's going to loop for as long as we're on there. And now the last thing we're going to tackle is the high scores. So we're going to need a new sprite for that. So let's go to the HUD, and inside here, we're going to create a new sprite. We're going to call this one SPR High Score Card. And we're going to import. We don't want the audio, we want art, UI, and this is going to be the high score card right here. So it just looks a little bit different. And I'm going to minimize this over here. We want it to be middle center, and that's everything we have to do for that one. And now we're going to talk about a new asset called scripts. Now, scripts are normally used to create your own functions, kind of like the ones we've been using already, like how we got the layer, or when we need to get any information about our objects, instances, or the game itself, we can use functions for do that, like getting a random number. We've used a lot of functions already, and scripts are a way that we can create our own functions. But scripts also have the ability to run code before your game even starts. It's going to be like the very first thing that runs. And this is great for when we want to use and set some global variables. So let's go ahead and create a new script in the script group. And we're going to call this our SCR underscore init, which stands for initialization. So essentially what we're going to be doing here is initializing some data that we need inside of our game. Now, we don't want to declare a new function here. We're going to go ahead and exit out of that. And instead, we're going to search for set global variable. We'll drag this inside of here. And I'm going to press the plus icon because we're going to set two of them. So we're going to have high score rescue and a high score height. We're going to leave them both at 0, and they do not need to be relative. So this script is going to run as soon as the game begins. So we'll have access to these global variables throughout the entire game and in every single object because they are global. Now, we're already saving the score for the rescue that the player has. So that means that we can use that object already. So we're going to go ahead and right-click on the score, obj score rescue, and duplicate it. And we're going to call it obj high score rescue. And we'll come down here, and then let's go ahead and replace the sprite of scorecard with the high score card. So that'll be under HUD, high score right here. And then in the draw event, what we're going to do is instead of saying rescued, we're going to say best rescue. And then down in the value, we want it to be a global, just like it already is, but we're going to have it be the high score rescue. So really, we're just replacing those values and making a new object with those so it draws the correct one. But we're also going to add in a really pretty particle effect when we do reach a high score. So let's add in the create event inside of here, and we're going to set an alarm. So just search for alarm, set alarm countdown, and it's going to count down from 100. And we're doing this to make sure that the instance is going to actually be visible because we are going to animate it onto the screen. So now let's add in that alarm 0 event. So inside the alarm, let's search for the if variable condition, and we're going to check the global dot score rescue. Now we are checking the score rescue here specifically. If it is greater than our global dot high score rescue. So if our current rescue score is greater than the one we've recorded before, then we're going to assign the global.highscore rescue to global.score rescue. So we're going to save the value that we've just gotten in our game. And we can actually increase the size of these boxes as well if we have long variable names. And then we want to burst some particles out of here. So I'm going to search for just burst. And we'll put this right down here. And we're going to use the same particles that we already have. So we're going to search for obj underscore game dot particle underscore system and obj underscore game dot fire. And we're going to make it relative xy0. And we'll do a count of 8. And then we're going to play a sound effect So it's a big deal when you get a high score. It'll look and sound really cool. We're going to play the sound, high score, and we do not need to loop it. So that takes care of the highest rescue. Now we need to do the highest height score. And we're going to do that by just duplicating this object that we have right here. So go ahead and duplicate the high score rescue. And it's going to be the obj high score height. Open it up. And we just have to make a few changes to it because we've already got pretty much everything set up. So go to the draw, and instead of rescue here, it's going to be height. And instead of high score rescue, it's going to be height. But we need to make sure we wrap this inside of the round function, just like we've done for the other values for the height. That way it comes in correctly. Then inside of the alarm, we just need to check it against the height instead of the rescue. So global height, height, and height. Again in the assigning variables. And there we go. So make sure all of those gets updated. Otherwise, you're not going to have your logic working the way you think it should. Now let's go over to the SEQ game over, because now we need to put in the high scores that we just created. So I'm going to drag my playhead back to the beginning, and I'm going to drag both of these inside of here, which we can do at the same time. Although doing that makes it a little bit tough to tell which one is which unless you select it. So just make sure you're looking over here so that you know which one you've got. What we're going to do is we're going to put the rescue score on the left because it's going to match the rescue score that's in the game up on the top left. And we'll put the height score on the right. So we're going to go ahead and stretch these keys all the way out so we can drag them, or we can just right click stretch asset key, which is really nice. And I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to put these in the corner area right around here. That looks pretty good. Then we're going to animate them so that they pop into place. So I'm going to want these to be in position at frame 90. Because remember, we have that alarm going off at 100, so they need to be in place by then. So I'm going to scrub over to frame 90, and I am going to add that key for each of these right here. And then I'm going to go over to frame 70, and I'm going to drag them down outside of the view. And by doing this with the automatically record changes, it has now done that. But you can see that, well, they're kind of moving in because when we brought them in, it actually recorded a keyframe. So I'm going to come down here and delete this keyframe, and now they will stay down here until frame 70 to 90, and voila. So our whole game over animation looks like that. And I think it looks really good. And now to test everything out that we've been doing, we need to run the game and play it a few times. So first, let's go ahead and get into the game. And then as we go, I've just got a height here, and we'll die. And there it is. Particles look great. Best height is recorded. Now let's get a rescue score and make sure that that updates properly. So we gotta find some civilians. Which, there's one. Okay. 1, 2, that'll be good. We die. And boom. Both are updated properly. It looks great. It sounds great. And actually, that's everything we need to do, because with these changes, we are now done with Fire Jump. Congratulations on getting this far. You have come an incredibly long way. If this was your first project, congratulations and way to go. Now, before you are completely done, though, I do have some more challenges for you, because I believe the best way to learn is by doing. And we've made an incredible project here, but there's even more that you can do. So here are some ideas to take Fire Jump to the next level. Increase the jump speed or the fall speed for the firefighter so that it becomes even harder. Try destroying the windows after they jump on them once so that they cannot go back. Maybe try adding another obstacle so that you have something besides just the fire and the civilians that they have to get to. Maybe after a certain height or a certain amount is rescued, you add in and you change the game so that it becomes increasingly more and more difficult. And the list really goes on. Those are just some ideas to get you thinking about it, because there's no end to what you can do with any game, but especially this one. You already are off to such a great start. Keep going, take this game, make it your own, and make sure you're proud of yourself, because you have come a long way. This has been a long series, but you have an awesome, really cool game to show off for it. Thank you for joining me on this 4-part adventure. I hope you've learned a lot, and that's what I've got for you. So keep making, keep learning, and I'll talk to you later.